These guys.
NASA.
Oh, NASA. Yes, yeah, I'd say
You believe that?
I hope we go back to the moon soon. We should have a base on the moon, like a permanently occupied human base on the moon.
Elon Musk has made significant strides in broadening the horizons of space exploration and making space travel more accessible than ever before. It's not all about NASA and other multi-billion-dollar funded space agencies. Private enterprises are catching up fast. But of course, this was inconceivable back in the 1960s when the United States committed itself to becoming the first civilization to set foot on the moon. Or did they, really? Ever since the moon landing of 1969, the motives and actual outcomes of the Apollo missions have come under scrutiny. And now, Elon Musk has made a bombshell announcement on social media, claiming NASA lied to everyone about the moon landing. Before we get to it, let's get some perspective first. The success of the Apollo 11 mission. The success of the Apollo 11 mission in 1969 was a monumental achievement that capped years of meticulous planning, technological innovation, and human determination. It was the crowning moment of a space race fueled by Cold War tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Apollo program itself emerged as a direct response to the political climate of the 1960s. The Soviets took an early lead in the space race by launching Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, in 1957. This sent shockwaves through the American public and government, triggering a sense of urgency in the US to catch up and surpass Soviet achievements in space. This led to the creation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, in 1958 to help the USA conquer space. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. NASA spearheaded their human space exploration efforts with the Mercury and Gemini programs. These missions tested vital aspects of space travel, including orbital maneuvers, spacecraft docking, and prolonged exposure to zero-gravity environments. Project Mercury, running from 1958 to 1963, focused on putting a man in space and bringing him back safely. The Gemini program followed, between 1961 and 1966, where NASA perfected the techniques needed for the moon landing, such as spacewalks and docking with other spacecraft. These milestones proved crucial for the later Apollo missions. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a bold proclamation that the United States would send a man to the moon and safely return him to Earth by the end of the decade. This historic speech set into motion the Apollo program, which began with uncrewed test missions and slowly evolved toward the ultimate goal of a crewed lunar landing. But it was not a walk in the park. The Apollo program encountered its share of tragedies and setbacks. The Apollo 1 mission met with disaster in 1967. During a pre-flight test, a cabin fire broke out, killing all 3 astronauts aboard: Virgil, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee. But NASA did not give up. The tragedy led to significant revisions in spacecraft design, safety protocols, and mission planning. Subsequent missions, such as Apollo 7 through Apollo 10, were pivotal in preparing for the eventual landing. Launched in 1968, Apollo 7 was the first successful manned flight of the Command and Service Module, which carried the astronauts to the moon and back. Apollo 8 made history later that year by becoming the first mission to orbit the moon, providing critical data about lunar navigation and offering the world the iconic Earthrise photo, which fundamentally changed humanity's perspective of its place in the universe. Apollo 10, launched in May 1969, was a full dress rehearsal for the lunar landing. The mission tested every element of the landing except for the actual descent to the lunar surface, coming as close as 47,000 feet to the moon. This mission gave NASA and its astronauts the confidence that they were ready for Apollo 11, the ultimate objective of the program. Following this, Apollo 11, commanded by Neil Armstrong, with Edwin Buzz Aldrin as the lunar module pilot and Michael Collins as the command module pilot, was launched on July 16, 1969. The journey to the moon took 3 days, and the spacecraft entered lunar orbit on July 19, 1969. Once in orbit, Armstrong and Aldrin entered the lunar module, named Eagle, leaving Collins in the command module Columbia, which continued to orbit the moon. As Eagle descended, the lunar module's onboard computer, which was supposed to guide the landing, began issuing alarms due to an overload in its guidance system. Armstrong quickly took manual control of the spacecraft, expertly steering it away from a rocky area and toward a smooth landing site in the Sea of Tranquility. On July 20, 1969, Armstrong reported to Mission Control in Houston, "The Eagle has landed." The Apollo 11 mission was the culmination of decades of research, development, and human effort, all aimed at achieving Kennedy's vision. Speaking of vision, what did they see up there? The Apollo crew's experience on the moon. Neil Armstrong was the first to exit the lunar module, the Eagle, on July 20, 1969, becoming the first person in history to walk on the moon. Shortly afterward, Buzz Aldrin followed him, and they both spent time exploring the area. As they walked on the lunar surface, Armstrong and Aldrin encountered a gray, dusty landscape. They observed the fine, powdery texture of the moon dust, and noticed how the lack of atmosphere allowed for sharp shadows and strange lighting effects. They planted the American flag, conducted scientific experiments, and collected samples of lunar soil and rocks. Armstrong took photographs, and Aldrin performed various tasks, including placing a retroreflector for laser experiments from Earth. The duo remained on the moon for a total of about 21 hours and 36 minutes, although they spent only around 2 hours and 15 minutes outside the lunar module, walking and conducting their mission. After completing their tasks and returning to the lunar module, they slept for a few hours before preparing for the return trip. They launched from the lunar surface on July 21, 1969, reuniting with Michael Collins, who had been orbiting the moon in the command module Columbia. During this whole time, Collins was orbiting the moon and awaiting their return. His role in the mission was no less significant. Collins spent nearly 21 hours alone in Columbia, as Armstrong and Aldrin conducted their historic activities on the moon's surface. Each time Columbia passed behind the moon, Collins would lose all contact with both his crewmates and mission control due to the moon's interference with radio signals. For 48 minutes during each orbit, Collins was in complete radio silence, cut off from all human communication. In these moments, he was the most isolated person in the universe, floating 240,000 miles from Earth with no direct line to humanity. Collins reflected on his solitude with a mixture of wonder and contemplation. In his autobiography, Carrying the Fire, he shares insights into his time alone, writing about the sense of detachment he felt, being so close to the moon yet removed from the action, while also being far from Earth and all human life. Despite the isolation, Collins later revealed that he never felt lonely or anxious during these periods of silence. Being the sole witness to the lunar far side, an area that remains hidden from Earth's view, Collins had the opportunity to observe something that no one else on the mission could see. So what did Collins see during his solitary orbits? Collins described seeing the stark and desolate lunar landscape with rugged mountains, vast plains, and deep craters beneath him. The far side of the moon, which is never visible from Earth, presented a view of cratered terrain that was more rugged and barren than the side facing Earth. He also observed the Earth from afar, a brilliant blue and white sphere hanging in the blackness of space, giving him a profound sense of the fragility and beauty of the planet. During this time, he was deeply focused on his duties, monitoring the systems of the command module and preparing for the rendezvous with Armstrong and Aldrin. After completing their historic activities on the lunar surface, Armstrong and Aldrin rejoined Michael Collins aboard the command module Columbia. Once the astronauts were safely aboard the command module, the lunar module was jettisoned into space. The trio then began their journey back to Earth. The trip back took about 3 days, during which the crew performed system checks and made minor adjustments to their course. Upon reaching Earth's atmosphere, they endured the intense heat of re-entry, before safely splashing down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969, where they were recovered by the USS Hornet. Well, at least this is the official version. Ever since, many have remained unconvinced that this is the whole truth. Elon Musk's perspective and viral video. As the founder and CEO of SpaceX, a private space exploration agency, Elon Musk has long been a prominent figure in the space industry. Musk has positioned himself at the forefront of private space travel, pushing the boundaries of what is possible in terms of reaching other planets, specifically Mars. Through SpaceX, Musk has developed cutting-edge rocket technology, including the reusable Falcon rockets and the Starship project, which aims to enable human settlement on Mars. He has also been able to access classified information due to SpaceX's work with government contracts, particularly NASA and the US Department of Defense. This privileged position, combined with his outspoken nature, has led many to consider his opinions as both informed and influential within the industry. This is exactly why a viral video of him began shaking the whole space exploration community to the very core. In October 2023, a viral video showing Tesla CEO Elon Musk casting doubt on NASA's 1969 moon landing spread across platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook, like wildfire. Musk can be seen wearing a black t-shirt and dark green jacket, saying he has some doubts about the authenticity of the lunar mission claimed by NASA back in 1969. He goes on to comment that it's hard to believe that we could have accomplished such a feat with the technology available at the time. So was the 1969 moon landing all a hoax? Did NASA lie to us all? Here, the pioneer of space tourism was dropping a bombshell on NASA's greatest accomplishment. Except, the video was fake. The clip was heavily edited from an original YouTube video uploaded in June 2023, which documented Musk in conversation with Pedro Pizarro, the president and CEO of Edison International, at the annual meeting of the Edison Electric Institute, where Pizarro serves as chair. In the authentic video, Musk is seen discussing ambitious ideas about expanding human consciousness to better understand the universe and humanity's place within it. The original context of the discussion primarily focused on futuristic goals, including Musk's broader vision for space exploration and advancing technology. He never cast any doubt on the moon landing. The visuals for this viral clip were taken directly from the authentic footage, but spliced together with fabricated audio to create a false narrative. Nowhere in the original video does Musk question the validity of the Apollo 11 mission, or express skepticism about NASA's achievements in 1969. The edited video first surfaced on TikTok in October, originating from an account called Deep Fake Chad, which has posted similar content under hashtags such as deepfake and AI. This suggests that the clip was intended to be a manipulated or deep fake piece of content, but apparently the video went viral, and most took it seriously. End of the story, right? Well, not so fast. Over the years, many doubts have persisted about the Apollo 11 mission. So, what are we to believe? Is the government hiding something? Conspiracy theorists propose several motivations behind NASA and the United States government faking the Apollo missions. Firstly, the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union fueled the space race, with both nations vying for technological and ideological supremacy. After the Soviet Union's early victories, President John F. Kennedy famously declared that the US would go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. However, some argue that the risk and expense of such a mission made faking it a more attractive option than actually sending astronauts to the moon. However, academics like Phil Play argue that if the moon landings had been faked, the Soviet Union, possessing advanced intelligence capabilities and a parallel moon program, would have exposed the hoax. such a revelation would have been a major propaganda victory for the Soviets. In contrast, the Soviet Union not only refrained from challenging the legitimacy of the Apollo missions, but also acknowledged them as factual. The Great Soviet Encyclopedia, a respected publication, described the Apollo 11 landing as the third major event in space exploration, following Sputnik's launch and Gagarin's flight. Moreover, some conspiracy theorists, like Bart Sibrel, assert that the Soviet Union lacked the technology to track deep space missions until 1972, after which, they claim, NASA abruptly canceled the final Apollo missions. In reality, the Soviet Union had developed deep space tracking systems by the early 1960s, and NASA's decision to cancel the Apollo missions was due to budget cuts, not fear of exposure. The Soviet Union's space program, which had sent uncrewed spacecraft to the moon since 1959, was fully capable of monitoring Apollo missions from the beginning. Naturally, the Soviet Union's silence on the matter proves that there was no hoax. Another argument posed by moon landing skeptics revolves around NASA's need for continued funding and the political pressure to avoid embarrassment. The Apollo program was a monumental financial undertaking, with NASA raising around $30 billion to send astronauts to the moon. Conspiracists argue that if it was impossible to achieve a successful landing, NASA would have faked it to maintain funding and preserve national pride. Supporters of the hoax theory also claim that NASA would not have risked the possibility of an astronaut falling ill or dying on live television. However, critics of this theory point out that NASA did face public embarrassment and political consequences, notably following the tragic Apollo 1 fire, which killed 3 astronauts during a ground test. Furthermore, there was no live video broadcast of the Apollo 11 landing or takeoff, meaning that NASA was not overly concerned with real-time public perception. NASA's accomplishments, while ambitious, were well within the technological capabilities of the time, and their achievements were documented in reports to Congress. Other conspiracy theorists proposed that the moon landings were orchestrated as a distraction from the Vietnam War, which had become deeply unpopular by the late 1960s. The American Patriot Friends Network, for instance, claims that the abrupt end of crewed moon landings coincided with America's withdrawal from Vietnam, suggesting a correlation between the two. However, historical records show that the end of the Apollo missions was not sudden. As early as 1970, NASA had begun cutting back on its ambitious plans due to budgetary constraints. By 1972, the agency's budget had been reduced by 42% compared to its peak in 1966, forcing NASA to cancel the final 3 Apollo missions and postpone other projects. So, the end of the Apollo program was more a result of competing priorities within the federal budget than any coordinated effort to shift attention away from the Vietnam War. But that's not all. Conspiracy theorists also argue that NASA either faked the landings entirely or misrepresented key aspects of the missions. Moon landing conspiracy theories. Many conspiracy theorists argue that the technology of the 1960s was insufficient to achieve a manned lunar landing, or that space radiation would have made such a journey fatal for astronauts. However, these claims have been thoroughly debunked by experts. Scientists like Vince Calder and Andrew Johnson have systematically dismantled these conspiracies, showing that while minor errors, like mislabeled photographs, do exist, they do not invalidate the overall accuracy of NASA's lunar missions. Moreover, James Longuski points out that over 400,000 individuals worked on the Apollo program, ranging from astronauts and engineers to support staff. The logistics of maintaining such a massive global cover-up without any credible leaks would be far more complex than actually landing on the moon. But it only gets harder from here. One of the most persistent claims made by conspiracists involves anomalies in the photographs taken during the moon landings. For instance, some claim that crosshairs in the photos appear to be behind objects, suggesting that the images were doctored. Yet photography experts have explained that these anomalies are the result of overexposure in copied or scanned photos. The original images, free from these distortions, show no such issues. The crosshairs in some photos appear rotated or misplaced, but that is only because popular images have been cropped or rotated for aesthetic purposes. Moreover, the seemingly high quality of the Apollo photos is due to NASA selecting and publishing only the best images. Many low-quality photos were also taken, but not widely released. The astronauts used advanced Hasselblad 500 EL cameras with Carl Zeiss lenses, producing high-resolution images. Many also question why there are no stars in these photos. Well, that is due to the camera settings. During the lunar daytime, the sunlight was so bright that the stars were not visible in the images. The astronauts' eyes were adapted to the sunlit lunar surface, and they could only see stars when in shadow. Additionally, stars were captured using specialized equipment, such as the far ultraviolet camera on Apollo 16, and photos of stars taken from lunar orbit and the moon's surface during other missions. Similarly, the inconsistency in the angle and color of shadows, which some claim suggests the use of artificial lighting, can be explained by the moon's unique environment. Shadows are affected by multiple light sources, including sunlight, earthshine, and reflected light from the moon's surface, astronauts, and the lunar module. Likewise, the claim that identical backgrounds appear in photos taken miles apart is misleading. While backgrounds may seem similar, they are not. What appears to be nearby hills are often distant mountains, which seem clearer and closer to the moon due to the lack of atmospheric haze. Without objects like trees to help gauge distance, the terrain can be misinterpreted. Conspiracy theorists often claim that the number of photos taken during the Apollo missions is too high to be real, but this argument ignores how efficient the astronauts' equipment was. The cameras they used were specially designed for space, with simplified settings that allowed them to take pictures quickly. In many cases, they were capturing images in quick sequences to create panoramic shots. Also, it wasn't just one astronaut taking photos, both were snapping pictures during their moonwalks, which doubled the number of photos. Some conspiracists also point out strange things like matching C shapes on a rock in the ground in a few images, thinking they were studio props. However, these marks are due to printing errors in the photo development process, as they don't show up on the original negatives. Another popular conspiracy claims that there should have been a huge blast crater under the lunar module when it landed, but this isn't true. The lunar module's engine was powered down significantly during the final moments of landing, so the force pushing against the ground was very weak. This is why there was only a slight disturbance on the surface. As for the lack of visible flames when the module lifted off the moon, that's easily explained by the kind of fuel used. In space, hypergolic fuels burn in a way that doesn't produce the kind of bright flames you see with rockets on Earth, so it makes sense that no flames were visible during the ascent. Similarly, conspiracy theorists have raised concerns about radiation from the Van Allen belts, but these were addressed by James Van Allen, the scientist who discovered them. He confirmed that the spacecraft's design, including its aluminum hull, protected the astronauts from dangerous levels of radiation. Other misconceptions include the idea that the flag planted on the moon appeared to flutter in the wind, but this movement was caused by the astronauts adjusting it. Since the flag was attached to a horizontal rod, it created the illusion of fluttering. The preserved footprints in the moon dust are also misunderstood. Unlike Earth's sand, which is worn down by wind and water, moon dust is sharp-edged, which allows it to pack together and retain the shape of the astronauts' boots. Additionally, concerns about how the astronauts' cooling units could work without an atmosphere have been dismissed through scientific explanations. The cooling units operated through a process called sublimation, where water turned into vapor in space, efficiently cooling the astronauts. Despite the loss of some Apollo 11 data tapes, there is a huge amount of evidence, from photos and videos to the testimony of the astronauts themselves, that proves the moon landings were real. If all of this seems too perfect, that's because it is. Too real. And there was one perfectionist who could have faked something like this. At least that's what some conspiracy theorists believe. His name was Stanley Kubrick, A Space Odyssey. Many people allege that filmmaker Stanley Kubrick helped fake the Apollo moon landings, pointing to his remarkable work on 2001, A Space Odyssey, which came out just a year before the first moon landing. Kubrick was known for his perfectionism and obsession with detail. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, he showcased groundbreaking special effects and an incredibly realistic portrayal of space travel, setting a new standard for how outer space was depicted on screen. His ability to create such convincing visuals, long before computer-generated imagery or CGI became common, has led conspiracy theorists to speculate that NASA might have turned to Kubrick to stage the Apollo landings. Kubrick was meticulous to the point of obsession, often shooting hundreds of takes of a single scene until he got exactly what he wanted. This attention to detail is part of what made his films so convincing and immersive, making even the most outlandish scenarios seem real. His work on 2001 involved consultation with scientific experts to ensure accuracy, from how astronauts moved in zero gravity to the appearance of distant planets and spacecraft. This devotion to authenticity adds fuel to the conspiracy theory, as some believe only a filmmaker with his level of precision could have convincingly faked a moon landing. However, despite Kubrick's ability to make space look real on film, the idea that he could have faked the moon landings overlooks the enormous complexity of such an operation, creating hours of footage, maintaining consistency with the scientific understanding of the moon, and fooling not just the public, but countless scientists and experts would have been a monumental task, even for Kubrick. Moreover, 2001 was released before the first Apollo mission, and Kubrick's depiction of the moon's surface significantly differs from the actual Apollo footage. For instance, the movement of astronauts and the behavior of dust in Kubrick's film do not align with the conditions of the moon, where gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth, and there is no atmosphere to cause dust to billow. Further fueling the conspiracy is the 2002 French mockumentary Dark Side of the Moon, which humorously parodies the idea of Kubrick's involvement. Although filled with intentional jokes and errors to signal its satirical nature, some conspiracy theorists mistakenly took the mockumentary as factual, reinforcing the myth. Additionally, the hoax was propagated in a satirical 1995 Usenet article, which invented a fictional brother of Kubrick, Raoul, who was allegedly involved with the Communist Party. This was another clear spoof, but conspiracy theorists adopted the story in earnest, amplifying the absurdity. Jay Widener, a key proponent of this theory, even suggests that Kubrick's film The Shining contains cryptic confessions of his role in faking the moon landings, though such claims lack credible evidence. So, where do conspiracy theories stand in the 21st century? Moving past conspiracy theories and doubling down on space exploration. Imaging the landing sites of the Apollo missions has long been a subject of fascination, particularly amidst ongoing conspiracy theories regarding the moon landings. Notably, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has provided detailed images of various Apollo landing sites, including Apollo 11, which is depicted in a nostalgic frame that evokes a sense of timelessness. Critics of the moon landings have suggested that observatories and the Hubble Space Telescope should easily capture these sites, insinuating that a vast conspiracy exists among major astronomical institutions. While the Hubble has photographed lunar regions, its resolution limitations prevent it from capturing objects smaller than approximately 55 to 69 meters. This makes it impossible to discern landing site details. Moreover, in 2001, a photo from the Clementine mission displayed a dark spot at the Apollo 15 landing site, identified by researchers Misha Kreslavsky and Yuri Shkuratov. The European Space Agency's Smart 1 probe also attempted to image these sites, but its initial high orbit restricted the clear visibility of artifacts. The Japanese lunar orbiter Selene, launched in 2007, reported detecting the halo from the Apollo 15 lunar module, further confirming the presence of artifacts on the lunar surface. By 2009, NASA had released low-resolution images from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, showing the descent stages of the Apollo landers, as well as astronaut tracks. While these photos have been instrumental for scientific validation, they have not swayed the beliefs of conspiracy theorists. Additional photographs from India's Chandrayaan-1 and China's Chang'e-2 further confirmed the existence of Apollo landing sites. The Apollo program's legacy is not just in the photographs, but also in the lunar rocks collected during missions. Over 380 kilograms of lunar samples were brought back to Earth, which scientists worldwide have studied extensively, with unanimous agreement on their lunar origin. These rocks, characterized by their lack of hydrous alteration products and evidence of impact events, differ significantly from both terrestrial rocks and meteorites. In contrast, conspiracy theories have suggested that NASA fabricated these samples using lunar meteorites collected in Antarctica. However, the rarity of lunar meteorites on Earth, combined with the volume collected by the Apollo missions, supports the conclusion that these samples are genuine. Independent tracking of Apollo missions further affirms their legitimacy. Various groups monitored the missions as they unfolded, utilizing radar and telescopes to capture sightings. Radio transmissions between astronauts provided additional evidence, particularly the deployment of retroreflectors by Apollo missions, which allowed Earth-based laser tracking. These retroreflectors have been successfully detected by observatories, confirming the landing's reality and providing a tangible link between the missions and ongoing lunar studies. Despite the myriad of evidence supporting the Apollo landings, the debate continues. But what is clear is that the future of space exploration, particularly through missions by SpaceX and other private enterprises, promises to unveil significant discoveries that could reshape our understanding of celestial bodies such as the Moon and Mars. As humanity gears up for more extensive exploration beyond Earth, speculation abounds regarding the revelations that await us. For instance, the potential to uncover new geological features or even biological remnants on Mars could provide insight into the history of life beyond our planet. Similarly, further exploration of the Moon may reveal details about its formation and its relationship with Earth, offering clues about the early solar system. Such discoveries could profoundly impact our perception of humanity's place in the universe. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads.